Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where forgotten temples still hum with chants no one dares speak aloud, where rituals carved in bone and silk survive only in the hush of old women and the silence of the dead. Here, we do not tell stories, we awaken them. Tonight, you will hear one such whisper, one that drifts from the Chao Phraya River in Thailand, a story not recorded in books, but passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, always after dark and always in a whisper. It begins with a bride, a wedding never finished, and a ritual that should never have been performed. This is the Widow Lantern Rite, a tale of grief so deep it dared to summon love from the other side and awoke something that was never meant to return. So light no candles, do not say her name, and if you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. Let the story begin.
The river gave her back. After 3 days missing, the Chao Phraya surrendered the body of Sao, bloated but unbroken, wrapped in the white silk her mother had stitched for her wedding. It was found near the bend where the banana trees grew thickest, where incense sticks often floated from old offerings meant for the spirits of the drowned. The villagers who found her said she looked asleep. No signs of decay, no swelling in the face, no fish bites, only the pale film of stillness and the strange, haunting calm of someone whose soul had not yet moved on. They carried her up the slope wrapped in fishing net and banana leaves out of respect. A few averted their eyes. Some crossed their fingers behind their backs, an old warding gesture passed down from mothers who had once lost daughters too soon. Her mother, Molly, refused to believe it at first. She had stood by the river for hours each day since the girl vanished, not crying, not praying, just waiting, with Sao's red wedding sash tucked in her sleeve like a promise still warm. When they brought the body to her, she did not scream. She did not fall to her knees. She reached out and touched her daughter's cheek. It was cold, but not stiff. There was no rot, only the faint scent of jasmine, Sao's favorite. And in that moment, something inside Molly refused to let go. As if Sao wasn't dead, not truly, not completely. As if the river had returned her for a reason. They held the funeral the very next day, as custom demanded. The monks chanted low under a darkening sky. Storm clouds gathered, but it did not rain. Sao's fiancé, Niran, did not attend. No one blamed him. Some say he left for Bangkok the moment they pulled her body from the river. Some whispered he'd been cursed by the water ghosts, those who steal brides before the vows are made. Others, darker still, said he'd been seen with another woman the week before Sao vanished. Molly said nothing. She simply prepared her daughter's body alone. Instead of white funeral robes, she dressed Sao in the silk wedding dress, hand-sewn, ivory with embroidered peacocks, finished just 2 nights before her disappearance. She arranged the silver headpiece, tucked flowers behind her daughter's ears, draped the red sash across her chest like a sacred veil. And then she waited, not for the cremation, but for a sign. That night, long after the villagers returned home, Molly sat by Sao's wrapped body in the temple's side chamber. The monks had warned her against it. Staying with the dead after sunset was dangerous. Spirits wandered at night. They lingered where grief clung like fog. But Molly believed in the hollow of her heart that Sao was still close, somewhere between here and there. And if she waited long enough, she'd return. Around midnight, the air shifted. The candles along the chamber wall flickered, one by one, then stilled. The scent of jasmine thickened. It came not from the dress, nor the flowers. It floated in on a breeze that should not have existed. The chamber was sealed. And then the weeping began. Very faint, not Sao's voice, but the voice of a woman, young, heartbroken, carried on the wind like a lullaby sung through teeth. It came from the direction of the river. Molly stood slowly, and for the first time since her daughter's death, she smiled. At dawn, she told the monks to delay the cremation. They refused. She begged. They reminded her to delay burning the body was to risk letting the soul wander, to give it time to latch on to the living, to turn lost spirits into something else, pret ghosts, as old monks called them. But Molly had already decided. She heard her, she said. She's not ready to go. And so she took the body back to her home, against tradition, against law. She laid it upon Sao's wedding bed, surrounded by folded white linens and glass jars of perfume. She lit 100 sticks of incense, left bowls of sticky rice, plates of fruit, coins, a small mirror, all the offerings needed to help a spirit find peace. But deep down, Molly didn't want peace. She wanted her daughter back. The days blurred after that. She spoke to no one, kept the shutters closed, answered the door only to place more offerings outside. But the villagers watched. They said they heard the old songs, wedding songs, being sung at dusk from behind her walls. They said the dog that used to bark outside her gate now whimpered and fled every time it passed. One child swore he saw Sao standing at the second-floor window, still in her wedding dress, brushing her hair with a silver comb. But when his mother looked, there was nothing there, just curtains swaying gently, as if someone had just moved from behind them. On the 7th day, the rain finally came. A heavy, choking rain that carried mud and memory. It turned the river to rust. And that night, Molly stood at the edge of the bank, holding something in her arms. A scroll, old, bone-colored, sealed in red wax. She did not remember how she found it. Perhaps in her mother's chest. Perhaps it was left for her. But the title was written in ancient Thai script. P.T. Komphai Mai, the Widow Lantern Rite. A ritual, to call the dead back for one last promise, to complete a wedding never fulfilled, to give the lost peace, or to bind them forever. Molly's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The ink inside had not faded, and under the blood moon, with the red sash wrapped around her wrist and her voice shaking with grief and love, Molly began to whisper the words aloud.
The river was quiet again. Too quiet. Even the frogs held their tongues, as if they too were listening for something beneath the surface, something not entirely gone. The rain from the previous night had passed, but the banks were still slick with mud, and the sky hung low and heavy like wet silk. Molly stood barefoot on the edge of the water, her feet sinking into the earth, her eyes fixed on the current. She hadn't slept. Her daughter's body, now dressed, perfumed, and resting beneath a shroud of white gauze, lay untouched in the second-floor bedroom. 7 nights since the funeral was refused. 7 nights of silence, of candles burning through the dark, of prayers whispered through cracked lips. The villagers no longer came. Even the monks had stopped sending boys with baskets of rice. Molly didn't care. The river had returned her daughter once. She believed,
No, she knew it wasn't finished. "Lady, are you looking for the lady in red?" The voice startled her. A boy stood a few feet away, his shorts caked in mud, a dead frog dangling from one hand. Molly didn't respond at first. She turned slowly, taking in the child's face, familiar. He belonged to the yam seller from across the village. "What did you say?" she asked softly. The boy pointed to the water. "She floats down sometimes, not every night, just when the air smells like flowers." Molly's throat tightened. "What flowers?" "Jasmine," he said, wrinkling his nose. "I hate that smell." Molly stared at him. "You saw her?" He nodded. "She has long hair, wet. Her feet don't touch the ground. She cries, but not loud. She just cries and moves. I saw her by the banana trees. She looked sad." The wind moved then, rustling the reeds. The river lapped against the shore like a slow heartbeat. "Don't tell your mother you saw her," Molly whispered. "They'll beat it out of you." The boy shrugged. "She already hit me, said I shouldn't talk about ghosts. But it wasn't a ghost. She looked real, like you, but wrong." "Wrong how?" "She had no eyes," he said plainly. "Only black holes." And then he ran off, leaving muddy footprints behind him and a silence that tasted like iron. That night, Molly sat by Sao's bed. Her daughter's skin had changed. Not visibly, but Molly could feel it. The cold was deeper now, the silence heavier. It was as if Sao had drifted farther away, into a place Molly could no longer reach with touch or prayer. But she hadn't left entirely. No, she was still here, waiting, wanting. Something was missing, a thread unfinished. Molly reached under the bed, pulling out the red sash, the one she had bled on, the one used in the rite. It pulsed faintly in her hands, a warmth that felt alive. 2 houses down, a woman named Juan claimed she saw Sao that evening, dressed in her bridal silk, walking behind a broken fence, barefoot, hair still wet. She didn't tell anyone at first, but she lit extra incense that night, placed fish soup by the window, told her children to sleep with knives under their pillows. In Thailand, when the dead come back too clearly, too vividly, it means they have something unfinished, and until that thing is resolved, they will not go alone. By morning, 2 more villagers came forward. One said she saw a shape floating near the riverbank, wrapped in red. Another swore she heard laughter, Sao's laughter, from the well behind the shrine. The fear grew quietly, like mold in rice. They avoided Molly's home now, left food near her gate but never knocked. Children were forbidden from walking past after dusk. They said the house had become a bridge, and bridges in old stories were always dangerous. On the 9th night, Molly dreamed of Sao. It wasn't like before, not flashes or whispers. This was clear. She stood in a forest of banana trees, mist curling around her feet, her dress still white but dirtied at the hem. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Her hands were folded, clutching something. A bone lantern. Its flame was blue. She held it out toward Molly, as if offering it to her, as if asking her to take it, to finish something. Molly woke gasping, sweat clinging to her neck. The scent of jasmine filled the room, and beside her pillow lay a wet, muddy footprint. She returned to the river the next morning. This time she brought offerings: 3 cups of tea, a banana leaf boat filled with rice and dried flowers, and a sliver of gold wrapped in red thread. She placed the boat on the water and let it go. Then she bowed, not to Buddha, not to any god she'd known, but to the river, and to the thing it had brought back. It was then that she heard it, not a cry this time, but a voice, soft, syllables floating like mist. May, May, Mother. It came from the current, faint, just once, then gone. Molly stumbled back. Her knees gave out. The water lapped close enough to wet the edge of her skirt. She didn't cry. She only whispered, "I'm here." Later that day, she visited the oldest monk in the district, Luang Pu Chai, who once taught at the Ayutthaya temple before retreating to a small forest wat near the canal. He was old, half-blind, mostly silent, but when she told him about the sash, the scroll, the dream, and the river, he opened his eyes. "You have begun something," he said simply, "and it cannot be undone." "I just wanted her to come back," she whispered. He said nothing for a while, then reached into an old chest and pulled out a yellowed notebook. In it were hand-drawn diagrams, old inscriptions, and dates long forgotten. He turned to a page marked with red wax. It showed the Widow Lantern Rite. Beneath it, a single warning written in ink. "The bride must be burned. If not, the groom will come." Molly stared at the words. "But I called Sao." "No," he said softly. "You called someone." And then he closed the book. That night, the dog returned. It stood outside Molly's gate and howled once, just once, and then it fled, tail between its legs, into the darkness. Inside the house, the candles guttered again, and somewhere above, in the silence of the bridal room, the sound of silk rustling, as if someone had just stood up. The house had begun to hum, not loudly, not like a song, but softly, the way a vessel hums when filled with something too vast, too ancient, and not entirely meant for the world of the living. Molly noticed it most at night. The walls creaked rhythmically, not with age, but breath. The floor beneath Sao's bridal room remained cool to the touch, even in midday heat. And the mirrors, all of them, every one in the house, had started to mist over from the inside. She did not cover them. She did not break them. She simply turned them to the wall, because in reflections she sometimes saw a second figure standing behind her, and it wasn't Sao. She began to search the house, not randomly, but guided, by instinct, by dread, by the pull of something unfinished. In the far corner of the attic, behind an old sewing table and stacks of water-stained boxes, she found a lacquered trunk, one she did not remember owning. Its lock was rusted. The metal held a faint black tarnish, as if scorched. The key was hidden in her mother's old prayer book, placed deliberately between pages about the Hungry Ghost Festival. The key fit. Inside were objects wrapped in red silk, a comb made of horn with one tooth broken, a glass vial with dried blood inside, a faded photograph of a woman Molly didn't recognize, dressed in funereal bridal attire, and at the bottom, a scroll, yellowed, cracking at the edges, tied with the same kind of red sash Molly had used for the ritual. She sat cross-legged and opened it slowly, fingers trembling as the brittle paper unrolled across her lap. The script was old, older than her grandmother's generation. Ancient Thai mixed with comb script used for protective incantations, funeral rites, and darker things spoken only at the mouth of cremation grounds. At the top was the name again, Piti Komphai Mai, the Widow Lantern Rite, the ceremony of the red flame and the bound soul. Beneath it, an inscription in small, deliberate strokes, for those who cannot accept death, for those who refuse the river, for those who will trade blood for breath. Molly exhaled shakily. It was not merely a remembrance rite, not a blessing. It was an invitation, and she had already answered it. The scroll spoke of two souls, the unwed dead and the wandering groom. In ancient belief, a woman who died before her wedding would become a prête nari, a tall, sorrowful spirit trapped between realms. Her longing would sour, her song turn bitter. She would haunt bedsides, weep near riverbanks, and call out for love in the voice of a grieving bride. To prevent this, some families sought to bind their daughters in ghost marriage, a hidden ritual only spoken of when the shame of loss outweighed the fear of the spirit world. But the Widow Lantern Rite was different. It did not summon a chosen groom. It opened a door. Whoever or whatever answered would come through. The steps were exacting. Carve a lantern from a cremation urn or bone. Fill it with oil infused with red jasmine and widow's blood. Wrap a red sash soaked in familial blood, either of mother or daughter, around the base. Call the spirit of the bride by name and offer her to the shadow beyond the veil. Do not look behind you as the lantern lights. The first soul to pass through becomes the bride's husband, or the mother's if the sash bears her blood. Molly felt bile rise in her throat. The sash. She had used her own blood, not Sow's. She had pricked her finger that night. She had bled into the silk. She had tied it lovingly. A mother's offering. She had made herself the bride. There were drawings on the scroll, some simple, others grotesque. A bride in white, her eyes hollow, leading a skeletal figure in red down a forest path. A lantern held high above a river, the flame inside shaped like a face. A woman on fire, with jasmine blooming from her mouth. Molly turned the scroll over and found words scratched in newer ink, untidy, trembling strokes from a trembling hand. If you hear the groom speak, it is already too late. Do not kiss the mirror. Burn the sash. She folded the scroll with reverence and wrapped it in cloth, placing it beside her bed. That night, the lantern on the porch, unlit for days, flared with a cold red light. No one had touched it. No one had placed a flame. The dreams came heavier. Sow walked slower now. Her mouth no longer moved. Her lantern dimmed each time she appeared, as though her spirit were receding. But another figure drew nearer. A man, tall, thin, his face always obscured, not by shadow, but by shimmering veil-like silk, the same kind worn by grooms in old cremation wedding rites. He stood at the edge of the dream, watching. Sometimes he moved his hand, not beckoning, but offering something, a ring made of bone. Molly woke in sweat, her mouth dry, her fingertips faintly stained with ash. The sash was gone from the altar. She searched the house in panic, kitchen, stairs, bedposts, until she found it, gently wrapped around Sow's hands.
but the knot tied at her daughter's fingers was not hers. It was a groom's knot, the binding style used in ancient funerary marriages, meant to link two souls eternally beyond death. She tried to pull it away, but it held fast, and under her daughter's closed eyelids, Molly thought she saw a twitch. At dawn, she went to the shrine keeper near the old Bodhi tree, an old woman with clouded eyes and hands stained from ink and oil. Molly showed her the scroll, told her everything. The woman went silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "This rite was banned after the monk's widow burned herself in grief. They say her scream was heard 3 villages away. The lantern didn't just light, it burst." "Did it work?" The woman nodded once. "It worked, but it didn't stop. The groom came again for the next daughter, and the next. And the spirit? She was never seen again," the old woman whispered. "Some say she became the flame inside the lantern. Some say she became the veil over his face." Molly's hands trembled. "What do I do?" she asked. The woman pressed a pouch into her hand. It smelled of herbs and salt and iron. "Sleep with this and pray he hasn't chosen yet." That night, as Molly passed by her mirror, the only one she hadn't turned, she caught her reflection pause. Not her. Her face remained, but her body lingered. And then it smiled and whispered, "He's already here."
Molly waited until the monks had begun their evening chants, that hour between light and full dark, when incense smoke hung thick in the air, and the spirits, as the old people said, began to stir in their urns. She laid everything out carefully. On the old altar table, once used by her mother, now wiped clean of Buddha statues and replaced with objects of personal meaning. A photo of Sao, taken a month before the wedding. A small, polished bone, taken from her daughter's cremation urn when no one was looking. A brass bowl filled with rainwater collected on the 7th night. A bundle of dried jasmine tied with red thread. And the red sash, the same one soaked in Molly's blood, still carrying the faint iron scent of grief. She worked by candlelight, the flame shivering each time her fingers brushed the cloth. Her mouth was dry, but she dare not drink. The scroll had warned, no water until the lantern was lit. Across the room, Sao's body lay motionless, but Molly had begun to speak to her again, not out of madness, not denial, but because something always answered. Sometimes a flicker of movement in the air, sometimes a cold draft from nowhere. Once, when Molly whispered, "I'm sorry," a teardrop of condensation formed on the window, a single perfect circle, as if the house itself wept. She carved the lantern by hand. The scroll had said bone, and so she had waited for the right moment, the right offering. And when no one was watching, she returned to the cremation stupa and took it, one clean, pale fragment, still warm to the touch. She didn't know which part of Sao it was, but she knew it would be enough. The frame was shaped like a lotus. She inlaid it with slivers of brass from her wedding earrings, and at the center she placed a wick coiled from her own hair, dipped in oil soaked with red jasmine and a single drop of her own blood. The flame would not be ordinary. It would be hers. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees bent without sound. A pressure filled the air, like the moment before thunder. Not noise, but weight, as if the world had inhaled and was waiting to exhale. Molly knelt before the altar. She unwrapped the sash. It was darker now, no longer a bright bridal red, but the color of dried clay. She folded it over once, then twice, and wound it around the lantern's base, whispering Sao's full name with each loop. Sao-chan Malawi, Sao-chan Malawi. The wick remained dark. She dipped her fingers into the brass bowl, traced a spiral of water across her forehead, then whispered the invocation from the scroll. By the blood that binds, by the name that remembers, by the fire that waits, come. Then she lit the wick. The flame did not start gently. It flared, tall, white, then crimson, licking the air like a tongue. The scent of jasmine flooded the room, and as the flame caught, the shadows shifted. Not danced, shifted, as if they had mass, direction, intent. The flame pulsed once, and then the room became still. Dead still. No wind, no insects, no creaking wood. Even her heartbeat seemed to pause. And in that moment, she felt it, like a rope tightening slowly around her wrist. She looked down. The sash had unfurled, and now it was tied, not loosely, but in a knot she had not made, the groom's knot. She tried to move. Her limbs obeyed, but sluggishly, as if pushing through water. The air had thickened. Her ears rang softly, like temple bells struck far away. The scroll had said, "Do not look behind you when the lantern lights." But something brushed the back of her neck. Cold, slow, fingertip pressure, and then a voice, soft like breath against skin. Wife. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her body froze, but her soul pulled inward, retreating to that place all grieving mothers know, the place where pain becomes silence, where fear becomes resolve. "I am not yours," she whispered. The flame guttered, the room shuddered, and behind her something exhaled. A dry, empty sound, like dust falling through silk. When she turned against the scroll's warning, nothing was there. No figure, no shadow, only Sao's body. But the eyes were open, not fully, just enough to show a sliver of black. Molly rushed forward, placing trembling fingers on her daughter's wrist. Still cold, no pulse, but on the sheets there were fresh prints, dark, wet, shaped like hands, not Sao's, too large, too long, and between them, a small object, a ring made of bone. She buried the ring in salt that night, not in the earth, but beneath her mother's altar, and still she felt it humming faintly through the wood. The lantern's flame would not go out, even after she covered it, even after she hid it beneath a bronze bowl. It flickered behind metal,
casting shadows that had no right to move. And Sao, her body no longer stayed still. Sometimes Molly would find her turned slightly on the bed. Sometimes her fingers curled. Once her lips parted just enough to whisper, "Cold," before freezing again. The veil between here and there was thinning, and something was stepping through. The following morning, a villager was found dead. A rice merchant named Ari, widowed, kind, the kind of woman who left fruit on the altars of strangers. They found her seated at her dinner table, dressed in her own wedding clothes. Her mouth was sewn shut with red thread, her fingers stained with candle wax, and in her lap a lotus-shaped lantern, cold, burned through. No one could explain it, but whispers spread quickly. Someone had performed the Widow Lantern Rite, and now the groom had come.
He began appearing in dreams, not just Molly's, but the village's, one by one. A shape, tall, lean, dressed in ancient wedding robes the color of dried blood. His face always obscured, hidden beneath a veil made of pale silk, as was tradition in long-forgotten funerary rites. Only his hands were ever visible, thin, stretched, almost too long, like something that had forgotten the shape of a human body, but was trying, desperately, to wear it again. Juan, the yam seller, saw him first. In her dream, he stood beside her husband's old spirit altar. His fingers were stroking the rim of the incense bowl, slowly, reverently. Then he turned, but not toward her, toward the picture of Sao. Juan woke screaming. Her husband's altar had been knocked over in the night. No rats, no wind, no earthquake. The only thing out of place, a single line of wax that led from the overturned bowl to her kitchen window, as if someone had walked through the house in a wedding procession of one. The second was Chai, the boatman. He dreamt of rowing a bride across the river, but behind her sat another passenger, silent, unmoving. A man with veiled eyes and a garland of funeral lilies draped over his shoulder. When Chai woke, he found his boat full of dead fish, their eyes white, their mouths sewn shut by riverweed. He refused to take passengers after dark from that day on. Molly began to unravel. Not outwardly, not yet, but inside, the stitching of her grief, once tight and purposeful, began to fray. Her prayers grew disjointed. She forgot meals, spoke aloud to empty corners, and still the lantern burned. She had tried to extinguish it every night, and every morning it relit. Even when smothered under bronze, even when drowned in oil, even when placed in a sealed clay jar and buried under jasmine roots, the flame remained, alive, watching, waiting. Sao's body changed. Not in decay, that was the horror. There was no decay. Her skin remained smooth, untouched by time. Her cheeks still held their shape. Her lips still wore the faintest hue of rose from the wedding makeup Molly had once so lovingly applied. But she no longer smelled like jasmine. She smelled like river water, damp, algae-tinged, with a metallic hint of iron. And her hair? It grew. Not much, but enough that Molly had to comb it each morning, lest it knot into thick tangles that clung to her daughter's face like spider webs. Once, while brushing, Molly swore she felt a breath against her cheek, gentle, warm. When she looked down, Sao's mouth had parted slightly. Her teeth were turning black. Then came the second death. An old man named Kiet, whose house stood closest to the river bend, was found seated upright in his doorway, eyes open, hands folded over his chest as if in prayer, but stitched together with red thread, holding a rotted bouquet of banana leaves. On his tongue, a coin, an old one, from the reign of King Rama IV. Beside him, a note written in river mud. It read only one word: "To you." The monks returned, reluctantly, fearfully. They chanted around Molly's home, sprinkled salt and ash, nailed blessed string over her door frames. But none would enter. When asked why, Luang Pu Chai only said, "There are many spirits in that house now, but only one is smiling." Molly no longer dreamed of Sao. Now the groom came alone. He stood closer each time, his hands twitching, the bone ring cradled in his palm. And behind him, a chorus of brides, dozens, maybe more, faces veiled, eyes hollow, their mouths stitched with red thread, yet Molly could still hear them singing. A low, melodic chant, one that echoed long after she woke, one she could not forget. The scroll had warned of this. She reread it by candlelight, the brittle paper flaking in her hands. There, in the margin, scribbled in faded charcoal, "The strongest spirit comes, not the one you call, but the one who hears first." And Molly knew then, what had answered her lantern was not Sao's intended, not Niran, the runaway fiancé, not any boy her daughter had known. It was someone older, someone who had been waiting longer, a widower, not a groom, a man once buried alive during the reign of the old kings, punished for marrying the dead, for using sorcery to bind spirits to him in ghost weddings beneath ruined temples. The matchmaker had whispered of him, Tao Wichai, a name erased from temple records, known only in lullabies too grim for children. The story went that he performed a wedding every 7 years with a different bride taken from those who summoned him by accident. Molly had summoned him, with her own blood, with her own name whispered beside the flame. She had become the offering. She tried to undo it, gathered the scroll, the sash, the lantern. She took them to the river, wrapped them in cloth and stone, and flung them into the current. They floated, did not sink. She stood in the water until her knees shook, screaming Sao's name into the night. No one answered. But when she returned home, the lantern sat on the altar, dry, lit, and beside it, a second sash, not hers, but Sao's, racked in a perfect groom's knot. The final sign came the next night, the crimson fog. It rolled in without warning, a low glowing mist that hugged the ground and filled the air with the scent of dying flowers. Villagers stayed inside, doors barred, windows shuttered, but even through closed slats they saw it, a procession, a parade of figures in wedding garb drifting down the main road in silence. Some walked, some floated, some crawled. All were veiled. All were dressed in silk stitched with funeral gold. At the front, the groom,
and beside him, an empty space where a bride should have walked, one hand outstretched, waiting. By dawn, the fog was gone, and in the temple courtyard, someone had left an offering, a bridal sash, freshly stained with blood, and beneath it, scratched into the stone with bone or nail, "The wedding begins at dusk." Molly lit every candle she owned. She wrapped Sao's body in salt, laid iron scissors at the windows, drew runes on the floor in chalk and blessed oil. But in her heart, she knew she had brought the wrong spirit, and he had come not for peace, but he had come to wed. The fog hadn't returned since the procession, but its memory clung to the village like smoke after fire, acrid, invisible, impossible to wash away. Children were kept indoors, dogs refused to bark after sundown, and no one, not even the bearing teenage boys, walked past Molly's home. There were no more visits, no more offerings, only silence, the kind that feels watched. Molly barely ate. The bone lantern burned low now, its flame no longer crimson but pale, as if starved, yet it refused to die. Each morning she found the bridal sash moved, placed on her pillow, tied around a doorknob, draped across Sao's body like a blessing or a claim. Her daughter's skin remained unchanged, still smooth, still untouched by decay, but her fingernails had darkened and her lips had split in a line of dried blood. Every now and then Molly swore she saw her twitch, and in the early hours, just before dawn, the air turned heavy, not cold, but thick, like breathing through a veil. The scroll had given her one final clue. A single line in calm script, so faded it had to be read beneath firelight and prayer. "He is buried in the temple that breathes beneath the mangroves." The words haunted her. So she went to the one person who might know, even if he had already warned her once to walk away. Luang Pu Chai was waiting for her, as if he knew, as if he'd been listening since the night she lit the flame. "You summon something old, older than this village, older than the river." Molly said nothing, only placed the scroll before him. The monk looked at it with tired eyes. "Do you know the story of the last bride?" he asked. She shook her head. She was 12, not yet wed, but promised. She drowned during the Songkran festival. The family refused to burn the body. The mother lit the lantern. She thought the ritual was mercy. He looked up. It was not mercy. "What came?" Molly asked. He closed the scroll slowly. "His name was once Tao Wichai Yomarat, a nobleman's son, obsessed with death. They say he studied under a wandering monk who whispered secrets from the underworld, rites not meant for men. He began marrying ghosts, digging up brides, burying himself with their ashes, believing he could become immortal through the sorrow of the dead. And did he? No, he whispered. He became something worse." Molly listened in silence. "Where was he buried?" she asked finally. "There is a temple deep in the mangrove swamp, no longer marked on maps. It was sealed after the last fire. Some say it was never consecrated. Others say it was a place of unmarriage, where souls were torn apart instead of joined. Can I reach it? You can try, but not alone. But she was alone. She had been since the river took Sao. So she went. Just before sunset, with the scroll wrapped in cloth, the lantern in hand, and the sash tied around her waist like armor. The swamp was 3 miles east, a place children were warned never to go. The mud could eat a grown man whole. The trees bent inwards, crooked like old fingers, and the air buzzed with the sound of things that should not fly. She walked for hours, until the trees began to thin, and the sky above glowed with a strange violet hue. And then she found it. The temple was half swallowed by the earth. Its roof had collapsed in on itself. Stone dragons twisted and broken. Vines crept through the walls like veins, and at the center, a staircase led down into darkness. There were no bells, no monks, no signs of prayer. Only an overwhelming sense of wrongness and the smell of wedding incense, aged, sour, clinging to the back of her throat. She descended, step by step, the lantern flickering in her hands. The walls were covered in carvings, but not of Buddha. These were of couples bound in unnatural ways. Some kissed while bleeding from the mouth. Others held hands over open graves. One showed a bride in flames, smiling. And beneath it all, rows of names carved over and over, as if inscribed in desperation. Most were female, but one name repeated, Tao Wei Chai. At the bottom was a sealed chamber. The door had no handle, only a circular recess the size of a ring. Molly hesitated. She reached into her pouch and retrieved the bone ring she had buried. It was still warm. When she placed it in the recess, the door groaned open. A rush of cold air struck her, and the scent of jasmine and rot. The floor was covered in sashes, red, dozens, hundreds, some faded, some stained, each folded neatly, each tied in a bridal knot. And at the center, a glass coffin. Within it, Sao. Molly dropped the lantern. Her knees gave out, her scream caught in her throat. It was not possible. Sao's body was at home. She had dressed it, bathed it, slept beside it. But here she was, still in her wedding silk, still with the comb in her hair, still with the red sash across her chest. And yet, younger, fresher, unrotted, unchanged. On the glass, something was carved. 4 words. Wife of the 9th. Below it, another ring. This one carved from her own rib. Molly recognized the break. She had broken a rib giving birth. And suddenly she understood. This temple was not for brides. It was a vault. Each coffin, each sash, each soul, a bride claimed. All who had called the lantern, all who had whispered to the flame, all his. And Molly had made herself the 10th. The shadows moved, not around her, within her, and from behind the glass, Sao opened her eyes, not in peace, not in joy, but in pain. She reached up, and her mouth formed a single word. Not mother, but run.
Maylie didn't remember walking home, only the feeling that she had been followed, not by footsteps, but by a presence that pressed against her skin like wet silk, clinging to her neck, breathing at her back. She locked the doors, barred the windows, hung salt cords around the threshold. But it no longer mattered. She had brought him back with her, and now the house was no longer hers. She found Sao's body seated upright on the bridal bed. It hadn't moved on its own, or at least that's what Molly told herself. The hands were folded neatly in her lap, a comb rested in her fingers. The red sash, both hers and her daughter's, had been intertwined, knotted tightly together in a way Molly had never seen. It looked ceremonial. And there, beside the bed, sat the bone lantern, glowing gently with a flame that no longer flickered. It burned steady now, confident. Molly backed away slowly. As she turned, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. The walls of her home were changing. The paint had begun to peel in patterns, floral loops, lotus blossoms, patterns seen only in old cremation wedding scrolls. And near the ceiling, a new crack had formed, wide, arched like the entrance to a shrine. Inside it, the plaster was bleeding, a slow trickle of red oil that smelled of jasmine and ash. She wiped at it once, but the stain remained, and her fingers came away blackened. That night, she awoke dressed in a wedding gown, not the one she had stitched for Sao, but an older one, yellowed with time, beaded with tarnished silver, one she had never owned. One stitched in the style of the old provinces, where brides were chosen for spirits, not men. Her hair had been combed, her eyes were lined with soot, her lips painted red, but not with lipstick, with blood, her own. At the foot of her bed stood the groom. For the first time he had come fully into her room, tall, towering, veiled. His robes moved without wind, his fingers curled with unnatural length. He carried no lantern, only a garland of dried lotus buds and a bowl of rice blackened with mold. He did not speak, but he extended his hand, and Molly felt her own body begin to move, not from within, but from something behind her chest, pulling her like a puppet on silk strings. She tried to scream. Her mouth would not open. Only her eyes could move, and they locked on Sao, still seated on the bridal bed, still watching, but this time crying. When Molly woke, her feet were muddy. She had no memory of walking, but the sash she'd buried beneath her mother's altar was now draped across her pillow, and pinned to it, using a bone hairpin, was a note written in smudged charcoal. Tomorrow, at the hour of dusk, the vows are spoken. The house grew colder by the hour, not with wind, but with something deeper, a spiritual cold, as though the house had begun to shift planes. Objects moved on their own. Mirrors refused to reflect. Rice turned black in the bowl. And at night, the rooms echoed with distant wedding music, soft drum beats, pipas plucked in slow, mournful tones. She burned incense. She poured salt across thresholds. She whispered apologies to Sao over and over again. But the red veil had already been placed above her door. In Thai funeral wedding rites, a red veil was used to guide the groom's spirit to the bride's bed. It was only ever placed once and never removed. The villagers spoke of the fog returning,
But this time, it didn't roam the streets. It gathered around Molly's house, thick as wool, tinted pink with the color of drying blood. One boy claimed he saw women walking in and out of the walls, all wearing wedding dresses, all with thread sewn through their lips. A woman swore she heard singing inside the house, not chanting, not prayer, but a wedding song, the one used to bind souls, not hearts. Then, on the evening of the 7th day, the door knocked, just once. No one had knocked in weeks. Molly approached slowly. Her feet no longer felt like their own. The air in the house pressed down on her shoulders, and her wedding gown rustled as if moved by unseen hands. She opened the door, and outside stood no one, only a box. Inside, a folded wedding veil, a ring made of saltstone, a scroll written in her own handwriting, though she had never written it. The scroll read, "Let the bride rise, let her walk the path, let her speak no more, let her join the dead." And at the bottom, signed in red, Tau Vichai, Groom Eternal. Molly dropped the box, ran to Sao, but the room had changed. The windows were gone. The altar had become a wedding dais, and above her daughter's bed hung rows of lanterns, dozens, flickering in red, each with a name carved in its base. Some names were in Thai, some in languages Molly didn't recognize, but all were female, and all were followed by one symbol, Gak, bride. Sao lay still, but her lips moved, one word, over and over, burn. Molly clutched her hand. "I don't know how," she whispered. But Sao looked past her, toward the lantern, toward the veil, and Molly understood. The ritual wasn't over, because the vows had not yet been spoken, and until they were, the bride could still run, still fight, still burn the altar before it bound her soul forever. Molly stood. For the first time, she no longer trembled. She removed the wedding gown, unwrapped the sashes, took the scroll, and walked toward the lantern, flame flickering like a tongue hungry for her name. She whispered not Sao's name, but her own. And then she said, "I revoke the vow." The room screamed, not with voices, but with fire. The walls bled, the mirrors shattered, the lanterns burst in waves of red light, and somewhere in the smoke, the groom stepped forward, unveiled. His face was a mask of every man she had feared, and behind him, 1,000 brides turned to watch.
The fog returned at dusk, but it was not like before. This time, it crawled. It slithered down the alleys and seeped under doorways like a living thing, spilling across the village like water poured from an overturned urn. It didn't glow red. It didn't shimmer. It was white, milky, soft, almost gentle. But inside it was silence, thick, suffocating silence, the kind that pressed into your ears until your heartbeat sounded like a drum. And in that silence, the air shifted. The wedding had begun. Mali lit every candle in the house, but the flame wouldn't hold. Each one flickered once, then died, not with smoke, but with a hiss.
She wrapped the bone lantern in the red sash and clutched it to her chest. Her palms bled from how tightly she gripped it, but she did not let go. Downstairs, the walls began to hum, not creak, hum. A vibration in the wood, the rhythm of footsteps, marching, and then the sound. Low, distant, drums. Not joyous, not ceremonial, but slow, hollow, like the thump of fists against coffins. Outside, the mist thickened. Villagers watched from behind shuttered windows, trembling behind old salt lines and prayer ropes. No one spoke. Even the birds were gone. The dogs whimpered beneath their porches. And through that fog, they came. The procession. It began with the music, a pipe flute, playing a tune no one alive remembered. At its front, a woman floated. Yes, floated, her feet hovering inches above the ground. Her hair was long, her veil tattered, her mouth sewn shut with red thread that pulsed as she moved. Behind her came dozens of brides. Each wore different silks, some gold, some red, some white with bloodstains down the front. All were silent, all were blindfolded, and between them, walking slowly, hands clasped together, came the groom. Thao Wichai, no longer veiled. His face was gaunt, stretched thin over a skull that seemed too long, too wide, too wrong. His eyes were dark pits, and in his mouth sat a coin, black with rot. He wore a crown of dried jasmine, and in his hands a ring of bone. Mali watched from the window, but it wasn't her home anymore. The room had changed, the floors now woven with funeral grass, the ceiling low with hanging talismans, some written in languages she didn't recognize. And Sao was gone. The bed was empty, the altar bare. Only the mirror remained, covered in red silk. Mali walked toward it. The lantern flickered in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the silk away. And there, in the glass, was her reflection, dressed as a bride, eyes black, veil on, smiling. A knock echoed from the door, then a second, 3 times in total. She did not open it, but the door unlocked itself, and standing there, barefoot, soaking wet, eyes wide with terror, was the midwife. She collapsed into Molly's arms, shaking. I tried to burn the sash. I found one in my home. I thought maybe if I... Her voice stopped. Her mouth opened, and from her lips spilled a single red thread. She gasped, clawed at her throat. Her eyes rolled back, and she dropped to the floor. Mouth sealed, dead. Molly screamed, not for help, but for Sao, because she knew then this was the price. The procession was not only for her, it was for anyone who stood in its way. The walls shook
The floor split. From the cracks came hands, pale, bloated, marked with rings and bruises, reaching, pulling, grasping at her ankles. Molly fell. The lantern slipped, but she caught it before it hit the floor. And when she did, the flame flared white, and the hands retreated. Then a voice, from everywhere, from nowhere. "Come, bride." She turned. At the doorway stood the groom, and behind him, Sao. But not Sao. Her daughter's eyes were black, her lips stitched, her hands folded in prayer. She mouthed something Molly couldn't hear, then raised one hand and pointed at her. The air collapsed, like gravity had shifted. Molly couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The groom stepped forward, his hand outstretched, the ring pulsing like a heartbeat. She backed away. Her foot struck the altar. The lantern flared again, this time blue, and a voice whispered from the flame, "There is still time." Molly ran, out of the house, through the fog, down the old road toward the shrine. The procession followed, but it did not run. It glided, as if death had all the time in the world. She reached the shrine gates, collapsed at the threshold. The old bells hanging from the Bodhi tree began to ring, one by one, without wind, and at the altar the incense lit on its own. The fog stopped at the gate. So did the groom. He stared at her across the boundary, then bowed, deep, graceful. A groom awaiting his bride. He would not cross the shrine, but he would wait. Molly knew. She had one more night, one final breath, and if she failed, she would walk in the next procession. Her daughter already had.
Molly did not sleep. She sat beneath the Bodhi tree, knees drawn to her chest, the bone lantern flickering faintly beside her. The fog lingered at the edge of the shrine's boundaries, too afraid or too bound to cross. But she knew it wouldn't wait forever. The groom had bowed to her, not as a threat, but as a man certain that she was already his. The wedding was not postponed, only delayed. At sunrise, she went searching, not for priests, not for monks, but for the one voice she had avoided until now, the oldest voice in the village, the one who, even in her madness, was feared, respected, left alone. Mei Buchan, the old matchmaker. They said she had once arranged spirit marriages in the war years, when bodies couldn't be returned home, that she spoke to ashes, that her hands had written down the names of the dead on red paper and folded them into rice balls to feed the unseen. Now she lived at the edge of the jungle, near the oldest part of the canal, a crooked hut surrounded by wind chimes made from bone and broken jewelry. Molly found her outside, planting white flowers into old urns. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, her back bent, her mouth twisted into a permanent sneer. But when Molly said her name, the old woman straightened. Not all the way, but enough to turn. "You lit the lantern, didn't you?" Mei Buchan said. Not a question, a confirmation. Molly dropped to her knees. "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" "You did. You always do. That's why it works." She limped inside. Molly followed. The hut was lined with dolls, hundreds of them, wrapped in veils, faces painted white, each one holding a slip of red paper with names written in black ink, and folded them into rice balls to feed the unseen. The matchmaker sat on a mat, lit a cone of incense, and pointed to the space across from her. "Sit. You only have hours." Molly told her everything. The bone ring, the veil, the dream, the groom, the empty coffin marked wife of the 9th. And when she finished, the matchmaker nodded, slowly, sadly. "I have met him once, long ago. I was only a girl." Molly's eyes widened. "He came for you?" "No," she said. "He came for my sister." She reached into a clay jar and retrieved a faded photograph. It showed 2 girls, side by side, one smiling, one not. "She died before her wedding, fell from the boat the night of her betrothal. My mother lit the lantern. We thought he would bring her peace." She fell silent for a long moment, then whispered, "He brought her a dress made from her own hair. He made her walk beside him for 7 nights. On the 8th, she burned herself." "Why does he come?" asked Molly. "Because someone must want him," my Buchan said. "That is the curse of the ritual. It doesn't summon peace, it summons a suitor." "Can I undo it?" "No." Molly flinched. "There must be a way." The old woman leaned forward, breath thick with age and herbs. "There is no unbinding, but there is reversal." "What does that mean?" "His vow can only hold if the offering remains whole." Molly blinked. "I don't understand." "If the bride burns herself, she cannot be bound. If she is defiled, she cannot be claimed. If her soul is freed, he loses." Molly clutched the lantern. "Then I have to burn my daughter's body?" My Buchan nodded. "And the shas must burn with it." Molly hesitated. "He'll come for me." "He already has," the matchmaker whispered. "You carry his ring." Molly looked down at her hand. It wasn't there, but beneath the skin of her palm, a pale circle had begun to form, like a scar shaped in bone. She began to cry, softly, silently, until my Buchan lifted a cracked gourd and placed it in her hands. Inside was a blue powder. It smelled of charred rice and lotus root. "Mix this with jasmine oil. Place it under your tongue. It will hold your soul in place while you burn what must be burned." Molly stared at it. "And if it doesn't work?" The old woman looked away. "Then you walk with him." As Molly turned to leave, the wind chimes outside the hut began to ring, one by one, slowly, as if something had walked past them. But no wind blew. And far away beyond the canal, the fog stirred again. The procession was moving. She ran. Back through the jungle, through the fields, down the road toward her home. But it wasn't her home anymore. It had become a temple. The walls were lined with lanterns, glowing softly, humming. The air smelled of incense and burning silk. Her daughter's bed was gone, replaced by a wooden platform carved with bone. And on it, Sao lay. Eyes closed, hands folded, a shas wrapped around her body like a second skin. Beside her, the groom's veil, and beneath it, a flame that burned without smoke. Molly stepped forward. The ground trembled. The mirrors cracked, and from the corners came the voices, brides whispering names, songs, prayers no longer meant for gods. She poured the powder into her palm, mixed it with jasmine oil, swallowed it. The world shifted, and the veil between her and the truth tore open. She saw him, not as a man, but as what he truly was, a creature made from longing and ash, a spirit stitched from 1,000 brides, a groom whose heart had rotted long ago, but whose hunger remained. And he was watching her, smiling. Molly stepped onto the platform, kissed Seo's forehead, then took the lantern and whispered, "I love you," then dropped it into the oil. The fire caught instantly, the shafts curled, the platform burned, and the groom screamed, the brides wailed, the house shook, the fog shattered like glass. And Seo opened her eyes, not black, not stitched, but clear. She looked at her mother, smiled, and said, "I know the way now," then closed her eyes and turned to ash. The fire burned for 7 hours. By morning, the house was nothing but soot and silence. The walls had collapsed, the roof caved in. Only one structure remained standing, the altar, blackened but intact. The ashes of Sao's body lay in a perfect circle at its base, untouched by wind. No birds came near. Even the insects avoided it, as if the land now belonged to something else, something watching. Molly stood outside the ruin, barefoot, shivering. The ritual was done. Sao was freed. But the vow still clung to her skin. The bone mark on her palm had deepened overnight, now a dark ring, the color of dried blood, raised like a welt. Every time her pulse beat, it ached. Every time she closed her hand, she felt the pressure of a ring that didn't exist, at least not in this world. She had burned the bride, but she had also bound herself. The groom had not left. That night, the dream returned, but it wasn't Sao. It was him, no longer veiled, no longer distant. He stood beneath the river, surrounded by lanterns that floated in black water. The bride path coiled around him, a spiral of bone and silk, stretching outward like a spider's web. He held her reflection in his hands, not her body, but her image, frozen in the same bridal posture she'd seen in the mirror days before. He whispered without moving his lips, "You cannot unbind the flame without feeding it." Then he opened his mouth, and out poured smoke. Inside it, voices. Saos, wands, the midwives, the matchmakers, all of them whispering one word over and over: flesh. Molly woke with blood in her mouth. The scroll lay beside her pillow. A new line had been added, not in her handwriting, not in ink, but scratched in soot. To end the marriage, you must give what you gave at the start: blood, name, and breath. It was signed, Thao Wi Chai, groom eternal. She staggered to the temple. Luang Pu Chai met her at the gates. His face was ashen, his hands trembling. He said, "I felt it last night, the fire, the release, but not peace. The air, it bends now toward something darker." "I ended the ritual, but not the bond," she whispered. He looked at her hand, at the mark, then closed his eyes. "Then you must finish it before he finishes you." Together they prepared the reversal rite, one not found in the scroll,
but known in whispers among forest monks, a way to break spiritual marriages when the groom refused to release the soul. But the rite required 3 things: the bone lantern extinguished by the breath of the bride, the ashes of the bound scattered over a river flowing west, a final offering, not of the dead, but of the one who lit the first flame. Molly said nothing. She only nodded. She walked back into the ruin at dusk. The air was warmer now, not in temperature, but pressure. The veil between worlds had thinned. She could hear music again, but not the mourning procession. It was a wedding song, this time meant for her. The lantern was waiting for her. She took it gently, whispered her name, and exhaled. The flame flickered once, then died, and in that moment, the silence broke. A scream, not hers, his. The house trembled, the ground cracked, and beneath her feet, the ashes swirled, not like dust, but like a spirit rising. Not Sao, him. He came through the floorboards, piece by piece, a hand, a face, a spine twisted sideways. His robes formed last, stitched from the memories of every bride he had ever taken. And in his chest burned a hollow socket where a heart should be. Inside it floated her ring, carved from her name, from her vow. "You called me," he said. His voice was made of river water and bone. "You walked to me." "I set her free," Molly said, backing away. He only smiled. "But you stayed." He reached for her. She dropped the lantern, ran, but the house was gone. In its place stood the temple beneath the mangroves, its walls bleeding, its doors open, the bride path lit with fire. At the end, the altar, and her name written in red. She climbed the steps, lit the final incense stick, and opened the urn. Inside, Sao's ashes. She lifted them with trembling hands and whispered, "This is my vow, to free her, to end this, to walk no path but my own." Then scattered the ashes into the wind. They caught fire mid-air, and the altar exploded in light. He screamed again, not in rage, but in grief. The bond broke, the ring cracked, and his form dissolved, not like smoke, but like tears spilled into salt. The brides behind him whispered their names one by one, then vanished, and the fog lifted. Molly collapsed. Her hand no longer burned, the mark gone, the lantern shattered, the silence clean. For the first time in weeks, she heard the wind again, and it did not whisper. The wind returned to the village, but it no longer felt like wind. It whispered differently now, not with grief, but with awareness, as if the land remembered what had been done and what was still unfinished. Because while the bond had weakened, the temple still stood, and something was still inside it, something waiting. Molly followed the old canal west, past the overgrown rice fields and fallen markers. She moved like someone already half a ghost, each step guided more by instinct than memory. The monk had told her once, "There is a temple that breathes beneath the mangroves." Now she could hear it, a slow pulse beneath the mud, a distant heartbeat made not of blood, but of sorrow, a sound like fabric tearing behind walls. The trees thinned.
The light darkened, and she found it again. The temple sat half-sunken, leaning sideways into the swamp like it was trying to bury itself. Moss grew thick across its roof. The carvings on its outer walls had faded, not from age, but from something pulling at them, erasing names too sacred or too cursed to remain. Its front gate had no doors, only a torn red veil hanging like a tongue from its arch. As Molly stepped beneath it, the veil brushed her forehead. It was warm, wet, and it pulsed. Inside, time no longer mattered. The temple's belly opened into a circular hall, not built for worship, but for binding. Coffins ringed the walls, each sealed with wax and pressed with old talismans. Faint symbols glowed red in the dark, written in a dialect Molly didn't recognize, but her soul did. They weren't prayers, they were names. Names of brides, names of offerings. And at the center of the room, sunken into the earth, lay the final chamber. She descended, one step, then another, each stair deeper than the last, until the world above her vanished. The air shifted, and at the bottom she saw it. A single stone bed carved with lotus petals. On it, Sao, not ash, not bone, but whole, perfect, preserved. Her body unburned, her hair brushed, her skin pale, as if asleep. Molly staggered forward. "No," she whispered, "this isn't possible. I already burned you." And then she understood. The body she had burned wasn't Sao's. Not fully. It was a vessel, a piece left behind, while the real body remained trapped. This place had held her daughter since the moment of death, wrapped in ritual, preserved by the vow. She had only freed the echo, the soul. The flesh remained, claimed. Above her, a soft humming, the sound of footsteps circling. A shadow moved along the chamber wall, tall, gaunt, twisting, and the groom's voice returned, soft, gentle. "You brought her back here." Molly turned. He stood in the alcove, not fully formed, a figure made of silk and bone unraveling. "You carried her ashes, and so her body remembers. You could have left, but you came home." His smile cracked. "You are a loyal bride." Molly stepped between him and Sao. "I was never your bride. You bled for me. I bled for love." He paused, then whispered, "And love brought you here. That is all I ever wanted." He moved closer. The air around him froze, the oil in her lantern clotted. Her skin burned beneath the mark that had once faded, now glowing again, faint but pulsing. "You burned the soul, but the body remains. She is mine, and so are you." She reached into her bag, pulled out the final offering, a blade carved from old teak wood, etched with monk's ash. She had hidden it from even herself, afraid of what it meant. But now she understood. To sever the bond, both vessels must burn, the spirit and the flesh. She knelt beside her daughter. Tears spilled freely. "I'm sorry, Sao. I should have let you go." She kissed her brow, then poured oil across the stone, wrapped the red sash one final time, lit the last flame, and placed it on her chest. The fire didn't burn immediately. It hesitated, as if the temple itself resisted. But then the sash caught. and the air screamed. The groom lunged, but the fire rose faster, blue, then white, then red hot. The stone cracked. The names on the walls glowed bright, then burst into ash. The brides, all of them, cried out, not in pain, but in relief. Their faces flashed in the flames, women from centuries past, from wars, from forgotten villages, each one looking to Molly and nodding. The groom shattered. His robes caught first, then his hands. His face broke like porcelain, and in his final breath he whispered, "If not this world, I will find you in the next," and vanished. The fire consumed the temple. The walls collapsed inward. The swamp hissed as flame met water. And Molly crawled, coughing, scraping her knees until she reached the threshold. The veil above the gate turned to smoke, and the temple breathed its last. Molly fell to her knees. The morning sun touched her face, and for the first time, the wind didn't whisper her name. It simply passed and kept going. The smoke hadn't cleared. Even with the sun rising overhead, the sky above the village felt dim, as though the world had not yet decided whether to breathe again. Molly stood at the edge of the collapsed temple, her dress stained with soot, her skin still marked with ash. But she was not finished. The vow had burned, but the bond remained. Because while the body was ash, while the veil had turned to smoke, something still lingered. The name she had spoken, her name, whispered into flame, written onto a scroll, bound into bone. It was still spoken by him. That night, she dreamed of Sao again, but this time her daughter stood upright, glowing faintly in silver light, dressed in white, not silk, not ritual cloth, but simple linen, clean, unstained. Behind her the brides stood as well, dozens, hundreds, unveiled, no longer stitched shut. They whispered nothing, they only looked at Molly and waited. Then Sao spoke. "He knows your name. Until you give it back, he owns it." Molly awoke, gasping. There was only one way left, one thread remaining. She had burned the lantern, burned the sashes, scattered the ashes of the dead. But the one thing she hadn't sacrificed was herself. She returned to the temple ruins that night. The air was still thick with the memory of fire. The wind had begun to move differently again, not hostile, but cautious, curious. She stepped barefoot onto the stone where Samhain had once rested, kneeled, unrolled the last scrap of scroll she had hidden from even the monk. A piece of the original rite burned around the edges with a single line. To sever the soul from the vow, the vessel must reclaim the name through breath and blood. There was no chant, no offering, only a single act. She reached into her bag, pulled the shard of bone she had taken from the groom's altar, the one she had refused to use before, and with a trembling hand she cut across her palm. Blood flowed. She opened her mouth, let it coat her tongue, then whispered her full name, Molly Inthara, daughter of Sopa, wife of no man, mother of Sao Chen. And then she spit the blood onto the stone. The wind stopped, the ground cracked, and the world tilted. From the trees came the sound of drums, not human, not ritual, but deep, like the pulse of something buried for too long. The sky blackened, though the stars remained, and through the smoke he came again, the groom. No longer dressed in red, but in burned white, robes trailing ash, his face unmasked. He did not float this time. He walked, each step melting the ground beneath his feet, and in his hand he carried her name written in black fire across the palm of his hand. "I still own it," he said, voice hollow. "You gave it freely." "I take it back," she whispered. "You bled for me. I bleed again for myself." He stepped onto the altar, reached for her, but this time she did not flinch. She gripped the shard of bone, held it tight, and drove it into the earth between them. The ground screamed, and from the shadows, Sao appeared. She was brighter now, brighter than flame. She held no veil, only a hand, outstretched, waiting for her mother. Molly looked once at the groom. He did not rage. He only watched. His face finally hollow, not angry, just lonely. But it was too late. Sao pulled her mother into an embrace. Their blood mingled. The altar cracked beneath them, and the brides all turned their faces toward the sky. As one, they whispered, "Released." The groom opened his mouth, a great silent roar, and from it poured light. Not fire, but every name he had stolen, every vow he had trapped, every flame he had hoarded. They flew from his mouth in 1,000 red threads, each unraveling as it went, turning to dust, to wind, to silence. Then he was gone. Not shattered, not burned, just gone, like a memory finally forgotten. The ground steadied, the air warmed, and Molly fell into Sao's arms. The bond had broken, but so had something in her, something she had clung to for too long, a need to fix what death had claimed, to hold on to love beyond its time. Now there was only silence and breath. "Is it done?" Molly whispered. Sao nodded, then smiled. "You let me go." Molly wept, not with grief, but release. And when she opened her eyes again, Sao was gone. No ashes, no veil, only the scent of jasmine on the air.
Molly did not return to the village right away. She stayed in the burned-out temple, wrapped in the torn remnants of her daughter's veil, seated beneath the cracked altar like a woman reborn from ash. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the silence. The first silence she had heard in weeks. No footsteps, no fog, no voices stitched with thread. Only breath. Her own. Ragged. Real. On the second day, the monk came. Luong Pu Chai found her kneeling by the river, placing folded lotus leaves into the current. Each one carried a name, some in Thai, some older, all names of the brides. "I saw the smoke," he said gently. Molly nodded. "He's gone." "The groom?" She shook her head. The silence. He helped her stand. Her knees cracked, her eyes burned with smoke that wasn't there. She looked older now, not in body, but in soul. Somewhere behind her eyes, a door had been opened and never fully shut. The bond is broken, but something still lingers. She returned to her house weeks later. What remained of it? The fire had spared the garden.
The jasmine had bloomed again, white as bone, petals curling like fingers at dusk. The walls were gone, but the altar, always the altar, stood unharmed. And sitting atop it, untouched by soot or time, was the lantern. It should have been destroyed. Molly had watched it fall into flame, but here it was, unlit, but whole. And inside the glass, a faint shimmer, not a flame, but a reflection. Her own face, wearing the veil. She picked it up slowly, held it to her chest, felt no heat, only weight, like something unfinished, something still watching. She whispered, "What more do you want?" The lantern said nothing, but in her heart she heard a name, not her daughter's, her own. The villagers began to return to her, timid at first, then with questions, offerings, salt, flowers, folded coins. No one asked what had happened, but they knew. There were no more weddings in Phra Pradang that year or the next. No brides dressed in red, no veils hung on porches. The wind carried their whispers far enough, and the river stayed quiet. On the 3rd month, a child came to her gate, a girl no older than 7, clutching a withered banana leaf boat, the kind used for river offerings. She stared up at Molly with wide eyes and said, "My sister died, but she came back last night. She said, 'Thank you.'" Molly didn't answer. The girl handed her the boat. Inside, a single red thread, uncut, unknotted, waiting. That night, Molly lit a single stick of incense, set the boat afloat down the same river that had once returned her daughter, and watched it disappear beneath the moonlight. The lantern flickered faintly on the altar, still unlit, still whole. Sometimes she dreamed of Sao, not as a ghost, not as a bride, but as a child again, standing in the old kitchen, laughing as she chased her shadow across the floor. No words, only smiles. Until one night, Sao stopped in the dream, turned and said, "The river doesn't forget, but it forgives." Molly woke with tears on her cheeks and the faint scent of jasmine in the air. But peace was never permanent. On the final day of the 7th month, the sky turned red at dusk. Not blood red, but lantern red. And as Molly stepped into her yard, the wind lifted the jasmine petals in slow spiraling circles. The lantern glowed, softly, for just a moment, then faded. That was when she heard the whisper, a single word, not her name, not Sao's, but something older, something beneath language, something she felt in her bones, something that said, "We are waiting." She did not light the lantern again, but she did not destroy it either. Instead, she wrapped it in cloth, buried it beneath the old Bodhi tree, and whispered one final vow. No more brides. But vows are only ever promises, and promises can be broken.
The village changed after Molly. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she had become a medium. A few swore she had been chosen by the river, marked by something too old and too sacred to name. But no one called her foolish anymore, and no one dared speak the words "Widow Lantern Rite" aloud.
not even in whispers, especially not in whispers. Years passed, homes were rebuilt, children grew, monks came and went. The old stories, like the fog, began to lift, until the memory of the fire, of the brides, the veil, the red sashes, faded into folklore. A cautionary tale told to daughters: never touch old scrolls, never speak the names of the dead after dusk, and never ever light a lantern with jasmine oil on the seventh night. But memory is fragile, and grief, when left alone long enough, becomes desperate. In the 7th year after the burning, a new family moved into the village. They came from upriver, a mother, a grandmother, and 2 young girls. Quiet people, kind. They bought the old matchmaker's home, restored it, painted the shutters white. For a time, nothing strange occurred, until one of the daughters died, the youngest, 9 years old, drowned in a pond behind the house. A slip, a silence, a white cloth drawn over her face. They buried her quickly, no ceremony. The grandmother said nothing. But on the 7th night, a lantern was placed on the porch, old, bone-colored, trimmed with red. No one noticed at first, just a flicker, a soft glow, the scent of jasmine drifting through the alleyways like a memory unspoken. But one boy, the yam seller's son, saw something. He said he passed the house just before midnight, and through the 2nd floor window he saw a bride, hair black and wet, dress white as salt, and behind her, a man, veiled, tall, still, waiting. The next morning, petals were found at the river's edge, crushed jasmine, a folded piece of red cloth tied in a bridal knot, and beneath it a single coin, muddy, worn, but etched clearly with one word: bride. The villagers said nothing, but windows were sealed that night. Children slept with salt under their pillows, and behind locked doors someone whispered, "It's starting again." The Bodhi tree in Molly's old garden bloomed late that year. Its roots cracked open the soil in long, jagged lines, and from beneath a flicker, a shimmer, the edge of something glass, still intact, still buried, still waiting. Somewhere far away, in another house, a mother sat alone with a piece of parchment in her hands. The paper was old, but the ink had not faded. She didn't understand the script, but the title was clear, carved in blood-colored strokes at the top of the page. Piti Kom Lan Mai, the Widow Lantern Rite. And in the stillness of that room, as the flame of a single candle danced across the walls, she whispered a name. Not her own, not yet, but someone's. Someone she had loved too deeply to let go. And outside, across the water, deep in the fog, a veil shifted, a footstep stirred, and a hand, long, pale, hungry, reached forward. Because grief is eternal, and so is the groom.